They told her family she must have fallen overboard. But her father never believed it. And when you hear the evidence, neither will you. It's March 24th, 1998. Just before sunrise. Royal Caribbean's Rhapsody of the Seas is slicing through the still waters of the Caribbean. Somewhere on that ship, Amy Lynn Bradley is alive. By 6:00 a.m., she's gone. No splash was heard. No alarm was sounded. And yet, within hours, the ship was moving on, as if nothing had happened. Her clothes, shoes, cigarettes, and ID were still in her cabin. Her parents, just down the hall, had no idea their daughter was missing, until it was already too late. And then came the whispers. Crew members seen talking to her just hours before. Alleged sightings, in hotel lobbies, on Caribbean beaches, in the company of men she didn't know. All with one thing in common. She didn't look free. This isn't just a disappearance. This is a story of missed alarms, strange behavior, and an unanswered question that's haunted her family for over 2 decades. If Amy Bradley didn't fall, then where is she? When the Bradley family boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas in San Juan, Puerto Rico, it was meant to be a dream vacation, a celebration of Amy's recent college graduation and a rare moment for the family to spend time together. Amy was vibrant, athletic, confident. A trained lifeguard. An experienced swimmer who had grown up around water. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't impulsive. She wasn't the type to lean too far over a railing in the middle of the night. So when the cruise line suggested she probably fell, her parents, Ron and Iva, knew instantly that was impossible. And yet, in the official version given to them in those first frantic hours, that was the only explanation offered. But there was something else that didn't sit right. In the early hours of that morning, before Amy vanished, the ship's dance club, called the Disco, was still alive with music. Amy had been there the night before, talking and dancing with several passengers and at least one crew member. One of those crew members was a man named Yellow, a bass player in the ship's band, Blue Orchid. He had been seen with Amy, on the dance floor, laughing, leaning in close to speak over the music. Multiple witnesses later confirmed it. And then, there's this. One passenger would later report that they saw Yellow and Amy leave the club together in the early hours, and head toward an elevator. What happened after that is a blank space in the timeline. When Amy's father, Ron, woke up just before dawn, he saw Amy sitting on the balcony of their cabin. She looked relaxed. Thoughtful. He didn't know it at the time, but that would be the last time he ever saw his daughter. By the time the family was fully awake, Amy's balcony chair was empty. Her bed untouched. Her shoes, clothes, cigarettes, and ID all still there. No one, not a single crew member, had alerted the Bradleys. Instead, while the family frantically searched the decks, the ship's crew went about their duties. Breakfast service was underway. Passengers were preparing to disembark in Curaçao. The Bradleys begged the captain to make a ship-wide announcement, to ask anyone who might have seen Amy to come forward. The captain refused. This is the moment where the story begins to bend towards something darker. Instead of locking down the ship, instead of sealing exits and questioning crew immediately, the Rhapsody of the Seas docked in Curaçao and allowed passengers, and crew, to disembark freely. Potential witnesses, potential suspects, could have walked off without anyone noticing. And here's the part that still infuriates the Bradleys. No man overboard alert was ever called. No emergency search was initiated in those crucial first hours. The official explanation? It wasn't necessary. But then came the first bizarre clue. A passenger, someone the family didn't know, claimed to have seen Amy later that morning, after the ship had docked. She was on one of the decks, walking with a drink in her hand, talking to a man the passenger didn't recognize. The sighting was brushed aside by the crew. And yet, over the next few days, more stories like it began to surface. Amy, in a hotel lobby in Curacao. Amy, on a beach, wearing different clothes. Amy, with strangers, looking like she wanted to get away. Were these real sightings? Or were they fragments of rumor, shaped by panic and gossip? For the Bradleys, one thing was certain. The idea that Amy had simply fallen was not just unlikely, it was insulting. Because every sighting, every whispered account, hinted at something far more sinister. Even more disturbing was a conversation Ron Bradley would never forget. After the disappearance, he confronted Yellow, the musician who had been with Amy hours before she vanished. Yellow told him, "Amy is a beautiful woman, but she's gone now. Gone. Not missing. Not maybe she fell. Just gone." And if that wasn't chilling enough, Yellow was later seen smiling, laughing with other crew members, as if nothing had happened. This was the moment the Bradleys began to suspect something terrible. That their daughter's disappearance wasn't an accident. That someone on that ship knew exactly what had happened. And that the truth was being kept from them. But the next development in the case would take their fears to a whole new level. Because when the FBI finally became involved 2 days later, they uncovered something the Bradleys hadn't been told. Something that would make them question whether the Rhapsody of the Seas was hiding a predator in plain sight. Before the headlines, before the grainy photographs of her smiling on the deck became icons of a mystery, Amy Bradley was just Amy, a young woman whose life was as vivid as the turquoise waters she would soon sail across. Born and raised in Chesterfield, Virginia, Amy wasn't the type to blend into the background. She was bold. Outspoken. The kind of person who could turn a room with a single laugh. She was an athlete, yes, a lifeguard who knew her way around strong currents, but she was also an artist, sketching and journaling in quiet moments, filling notebooks with pieces of her mind that she didn't always share. She had plans. Real plans. A job she was considering. A relationship she was weighing. The trip with her family wasn't an escape, it was a pause, a rare moment to exhale before she stepped into the next chapter of her life. Her brother Brad would later remember that Amy had been unusually affectionate in the days before the cruise. Not in a sad or resigned way, but in a way that seemed thoughtful. Like she'd been savoring the people she loved. On the Rhapsody of the Seas, Amy wasn't just another passenger with a plastic keycard. She was curious, observant. She noticed details, the way crew members moved between restricted areas, the subtle glances they shared when certain passengers walked by. She told her mother one evening that some of the staff seemed too friendly. Not creepy, exactly, but off. Like they knew something she didn't. That night, after dinner, the family took formal photos in the ship's lounge. In those shots, Amy's dark hair frames her face, her smile wide but not forced. Looking at them now, you wouldn't think this is the last day we'll see her alive. But less than 12 hours later, her seat at breakfast would be empty. The morning she vanished, the sea was calm. The sun was just starting to break over the horizon. Brad saw her briefly, leaning on the balcony rail, barefoot, hair pulled back, staring out at the open water. She waved him off with a smile, said she'd be down soon. It was the last time anyone in her family would speak to her. Later, when investigators asked what she'd been wearing, Brad could remember only fragments, a pair of shorts, maybe a t-shirt. Nothing out of place. Nothing that screamed danger. That's the cruel thing about hindsight. The most ordinary moments can hide the most extraordinary turns. The Bradleys never believed Amy simply fell overboard. Not because they couldn't believe it, but because they knew her. She was cautious around strangers. She didn't take risks without thinking. She'd been raised around water, trained to respect its power. If Amy went into that ocean, it wasn't because she lost her balance. And there's something else. In the weeks after the ship docked without her, people came forward. Not just one or two, but a string of witnesses, scattered across the Caribbean, each telling a version of the same impossible story. They'd seen her. Alive. On land. A Canadian tourist swore he spotted her in Curaçao, sitting on a hotel lobby couch with two men. A Navy petty officer reported a chilling encounter in a brothel years later, a young woman who leaned in and whispered, "My name is Amy Bradley, and I need help." If these accounts are real, they shatter the cruise line's tidy narrative of a tragic accident. They suggest something far worse, that Amy's disappearance wasn't random. That someone wanted her gone. That someone planned it. For the Bradleys, those sightings weren't hope. They were torment. Because if Amy had been alive after the ship, that meant there was still a chance to bring her home. But it also meant that somewhere out there, she might have been trapped, unable to escape, waiting for someone to find her. And the more they learned about the hours before she disappeared, the more they began to wonder, had the trap been set before the Rhapsody even left the dock? What happened next would push that question into territory so dark, it would force the family to rethink everything they believed about that night at sea. When the Rhapsody of the Seas finally docked in Curaçao, the official story had already begun to take shape. Amy Bradley, the cruise line told passengers and local authorities, was missing, presumed overboard. No suspicious circumstances. No foul play suspected. Just gone. But there was one problem with that tidy explanation. People on board didn't buy it. Not because they wanted drama, but because they'd seen things. Heard things. And some of them were about to talk. One of the first to break the silence was a passenger named Ron, a seasoned traveler, the kind of man who'd been on enough cruises to know when something felt wrong. On the morning Amy vanished, Ron had been on deck 10 just before sunrise, camera in hand. He'd been photographing the waterline when he noticed movement, not in the ocean, but on deck 11. A woman, barefoot, wearing dark shorts and a light top, walking quickly toward the ship's pool area. She didn't look like she was in distress, but she also didn't look like she belonged there at that hour. Ron swears that woman was Amy Bradley. And here's where it gets strange. She wasn't alone. He described two men trailing several steps behind her, both wearing crew uniforms. One glanced over the rail toward Ron, as if checking whether anyone was watching. Then, just as quickly, they turned a corner and disappeared from sight. Ron didn't think much of it at the time, until breakfast came, and Amy's seat was empty. When the Bradleys later learned about Ron's account, it hit them like a jolt of electricity. Amy didn't vanish into the ocean in the dead of night. She was seen, alive, after sunrise, and with crew members. And Ron wasn't the only one. Another passenger, a woman named Davina, claimed she saw Amy sitting on a lounge chair near the pool around 5:30 a.m., deep in conversation with a man whose uniform matched that of the ship's band members. The man was later identified as Yellow, not his real name, but the nickname everyone used. He'd been friendly with Amy and Brad during the cruise, sometimes stopping to chat during meals. Friendly, or something else? Because after Amy vanished, Yellow's demeanor changed. He avoided the Bradleys. He refused to answer questions. And when the ship docked, he was one of the first crew members off the vessel. The cruise line's official stance? They had no credible evidence Amy was still on board that morning. But here's the thing, they also refused to let the Bradleys review all security footage. The ship had cameras. Lots of them. Yet somehow, not a single frame of Amy from that morning was ever made public. Why? Was the footage erased? Hidden? Or did it capture something so damning it could never see the light of day? The deeper you dig, the harder it is to believe this was a simple oversight. Within hours of Amy's disappearance, the ship's captain made the decision not to stop and search immediately. Instead, they pressed on to Curaçao, a choice that robbed rescue teams of precious time. Every maritime investigator will tell you, the first hours are everything. If someone's fallen overboard, your best chance to find them is within minutes. Waiting even an hour drastically lowers survival odds. So why delay? For the Bradleys, this decision was unforgivable. It wasn't just a bad call, it felt like a cover-up. And that feeling only grew when they learned about the way the crew handled passenger interviews. Instead of gathering everyone and asking who'd seen Amy, the cruise line quietly questioned people one-on-one, without letting them speak to each other. By the time law enforcement in Curaçao got involved, the trail was already cold. Witness memories were fractured, details blurred, and any physical evidence that might have existed was long gone. But the real twist? In the years that followed, multiple witnesses on land, in different countries, claimed to have seen Amy Bradley alive. A taxi driver in Curaçao described dropping off a young woman matching her description at a small guesthouse hours after the ship docked. A Canadian couple spotted someone who looked exactly like her on a beach, flanked by two men who never let her out of their sight. Each account was like a knife twisting deeper into the Bradleys' hope and grief. Because if Amy had made it off the ship alive, then the ocean didn't take her. Someone did. This was no accident. And the more the family dug, the more one chilling question began to take shape. If the crew knew Amy was still on board that morning, who was giving the orders to pretend she wasn't? If the crew knew Amy was still on board that morning, who was giving the orders to pretend she wasn't? That's not a wild conspiracy theory. It's a question with teeth, because what happened next suggests that someone, somewhere, wanted Amy Bradley gone from that ship, and not in the way the official report claimed. Hours after the Rhapsody of the Seas docked, while local police in Curaçao were still gathering information, crew members began scrubbing down certain areas of the vessel. Not routine cleaning, deep, targeted, bleach-heavy scrubbing. Passenger Ron, the same man who'd seen Amy with two uniformed men, swears the pool deck and certain stairwells smelled so strongly of chemicals you could taste it in the air. When he asked about it, a crew member shrugged, just routine maintenance. But here's the thing, why perform routine maintenance in the middle of an active missing persons search? The Bradleys had no authority to stop them. The local authorities seemed in no rush to get involved. And the cruise director? Dismissive. Cold. Almost annoyed at the family's insistence that Amy didn't simply fall overboard. In one particularly gut-wrenching moment, Iva Bradley, Amy's mother, pleaded with the cruise director to halt disembarkation until they could search the entire ship. He refused. Not only did passengers begin leaving, but the crew was also allowed to come and go freely, without any baggage checks. If someone wanted to smuggle Amy off that ship unnoticed, this was the moment to do it. And then came the most haunting tip of all. A former U.S. Navy sailor, vacationing on the island at the time, claimed he saw a distraught young woman matching Amy's description being forced down a narrow alley by two men. He said her body language screamed fear, head down, stiff posture, quick steps. When he tried to approach, one of the men blocked his path and told him to mind your business. It wasn't until he saw Amy's face on the news days later that he realized who she was. The possibility that Amy was taken into the underworld of human trafficking began to feel less like speculation and more like a chilling probability. The Caribbean, with its vast network of ports, remote islands, and minimal law enforcement coordination, has long been cited by anti-trafficking organizations as a prime transit zone for abducted women. And if Amy had been spotted alive after disembarking, it meant she might have been trapped in that network, hidden in plain sight, for years. Still, there was a piece missing. How could such a brazen act happen on a high-profile cruise ship without immediate detection? The answer might lie in something no one wanted to say out loud at first. Organized complicity. A trafficking operation would need cooperation, or at least willful ignorance, from certain people on board. People who could control cameras, control access to restricted areas, control the narrative. And that's where the most disturbing thread began to unravel. When investigators later reviewed the ship's manifest and crew rosters, several names didn't check out. Some crew had been hired on temporary contracts with minimal background checks. And one of them, a bartender who had served Amy multiple times, vanished from the industry completely after that voyage. No employment records, no forwarding address, no trace. The Bradleys learned this not from the cruise line, but from a private investigator they hired years later. That PI would go on to tell them something they've never been able to forget. This wasn't an accident. It was a transaction. Amy Bradley was gone. But she hadn't just disappeared. And the Bradleys knew, if they wanted to find out who was behind it, they'd have to dig far deeper than the cruise line ever would. This is where the case begins to turn from a tragedy at sea into a calculated crime with international reach. And what the Bradleys discovered next would lead them straight into the heart of the darkest corners of the Caribbean. The morning after Amy's disappearance, the cruise ship sailed on. Not into a storm, but into a fog of silence. For the Bradleys, there was no such thing as moving on. Every unanswered question was a hook dragging them deeper into waters no family ever wants to navigate. And if the cruise line wasn't going to look for Amy, they would. They began with the obvious, gathering every shred of information from passengers who'd spoken to Amy, seen her, or heard something unusual. Some accounts aligned. Others clashed violently. But one stood out, a female passenger who remembered Amy mentioning she didn't feel safe on board. This wasn't paranoia. Amy had told friends back home before the trip that some crew members were a little too friendly. And yet, in the official narrative, she was portrayed as a carefree vacationer, someone who might have wandered off in a moment of recklessness. That portrayal didn't just feel wrong. It felt deliberate. The Bradleys hired private investigator Ron Pettit, a man with years of experience working maritime cases. He was blunt from day one. A cruise ship is a floating city. If you think of it as a small town, you've got neighborhoods you don't go into, people who know the shadows, and rules that don't apply to everyone equally. He knew what to look for, the blind spots in surveillance, the staff rotations that could hide movement, and the contracts that allowed crew members to disappear without leaving a trail. Within weeks, Pettit uncovered something chilling. There were gaps, literal gaps, in the ship's security footage from the night Amy vanished. Entire blocks of time were missing from certain cameras, as if they'd been overwritten or erased. And here's where it gets darker. Those gaps happened to align almost perfectly with the times Amy was last seen moving between the pool deck, the lounge, and the stairwells. Then came the first international lead. 6 months after Amy's disappearance, a former U.S. Navy petty officer claimed he spotted Amy in a brothel in Curaçao, alive. He swore she locked eyes with him and whispered, "Help me." Before he could react, she was pulled into another room. He didn't report it immediately, afraid of being court-martialed for being in a brothel. By the time he came forward, the trail had gone cold. The Bradleys pressed on. They learned that several women had been approached by men in uniform, sometimes crew, sometimes posing as security, and lured into private areas of the ship under false pretenses. Some returned shaken. Some never returned at all. And these weren't just rumors. Anti-trafficking experts confirmed that certain maritime routes are prime targets for organized rings. The ships themselves provide a controlled environment. The ports? A rotating door to anywhere. Pettit traced Amy's possible movements through these networks, following whispered tips and unverified sightings across St. Thomas, Barbados, and even into South America. At every step, someone seemed to be one move ahead, as if the Bradleys were being watched, their questions noted, their arrival anticipated. One hotel clerk in Grenada swore he saw a young woman matching Amy's description, with dyed black hair, staying with a man twice her age. But when Pettit returned with local police, the couple was gone. The family's frustration boiled over. They weren't just fighting for their daughter. They were fighting against an entire system, maritime law, jurisdictional loopholes, and corporate stonewalling. The FBI got involved, but their presence was limited. Cruise ships fall under complex international rules, and by the time Amy was reported missing, the Rhapsody of the Seas had moved into another country's waters. Years passed. Leads surfaced. Leads died. Then, in 2005, the Bradleys received a set of photographs from an anonymous source. They showed a woman on a Caribbean beach chair. Sunglasses. Bikini. But the face, the bone structure, looked hauntingly like Amy's. Even more disturbing? In the background, a man in dark sunglasses seemed to be watching her intently. The Bradleys turned the images over to the FBI. Experts said the resemblance was strong. But no further action was taken. The trail was as wide as the ocean, and just as unforgiving. By now, the Bradleys knew the truth they would never want to admit. If Amy was alive, she wasn't free. And if she wasn't alive, the answers were locked in a world that specialized in keeping secrets. This wasn't a story about a young woman who fell overboard. It was the story of a young woman who may have been taken, and a system that let her vanish. And the deeper the Bradleys went, the more they realized. If they wanted closure, they'd have to tear that system open. It has been over 2 decades since Amy Lynn Bradley walked onto the deck of the Rhapsody of the Seas, and was never seen again. At least, not officially. Because in the shadows of this story are pieces that refuse to stay buried. The FBI file on Amy reads like a script Hollywood would reject for being too far-fetched. A Navy officer sees her in Curacao, whispering for help. A Canadian tourist swears she met her in a restroom, terrified and begging not to be turned into them. An anonymous email arrives years later with photographs that could be her, older, changed, but unmistakable to the people who knew her best. And yet, nothing. No rescue. No arrests. No justice. Why? Because the truth is this: cruise ships are not just floating hotels. They are floating countries, bound not by the laws of the water they sail through, but by the corporate policies and international agreements that protect their bottom line before they protect human life. In Amy's case, every minute lost was another door closed. And someone, somewhere, made sure the right doors stayed closed. You see, Amy Bradley's story isn't just about one woman's disappearance. It's about the countless others whose names we will never know. The women and men who vanish at sea, written off as accidents before anyone looks for them. It's about a dangerous truth. At sea, the rules are different. And the people who make them don't want you asking questions. Her family still believes she's out there. They believe someone has her. They believe she knows they've never stopped searching. And maybe, just maybe, she's seen these documentaries, heard these podcasts, felt the ripple of her name echoing through the years. If she has, then Amy, this is for you. We see you. We haven't stopped. We won't. But here's the haunting part. If Amy Bradley is alive, she's lived 26 years as a ghost in her own story. If she's gone, she's somewhere no one has dared, or cared, to search. And either way, someone knows the truth. Someone on that ship that night saw something. Someone on board heard something. Maybe they're watching this video right now. So ask yourself, when you look at Amy's photograph, her smile frozen in time, do you really believe she just fell overboard? Or was she taken into a world that counts on you never asking the right questions? Because until someone talks, the ocean keeps her. And that's where you come in. Comment what you think really happened that night. Share Amy's name, her face, her story. Because the moment we stop saying her name is the moment she truly disappears.